Hello? Okay, let's go live. I show it's about 2 minutes after 7. I'd like to call the City of Kenmore Planning Commission meeting for July 19th, 2022 to order. So the first item is public comments. We welcome our community members to the commission's meeting. In this meeting, the commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the commission is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests first, which I don't see any, followed by our virtual guests. If you're online, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address comments to the chair and the commission. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Please state your name and city of residence for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time except by express approval of the chair and the commission. Screen sharing is not allowed. However, you can submit materials to the commission via the clerk in advance or afterwards. This meeting is being recorded, and thank you for taking the time to express your comments either here or by email or by letter. Madam Clerk, do we have some folks?
Yes, I see 2 hands raised. Stacy V, we will start with you. Give me 1 moment while I promote you to panelist.
Just for the record, we do have 3 commissioners live in the chambers and 4 commissioners alive on video. Versus dead, I guess.
Stacy, are you not seeing a prompt to join as panelist? If you do, go ahead and join.
And then he needs one. I printed one for you. Thank you. Oh, you have a hard copy? Oh, that's yours.
Yay. The first 2 times the panelist joining did not work.
Okay.
It finally worked the 3rd time.
Oh, okay.
Stacy,
Thank you. Could you
Sure.
give us just 1 second to get the timer going, Stacy? Sorry about
Okay,
that.
Stacy, thank you for joining us tonight. The floor is yours.
I think she said she wanted to start the timer. Am I good to go?
Sorry, 1 moment, please. We're getting it set up right now.
I have my watch, but they want to use the timer, Stacy. I don't know what to say.
Getting mixed messages here. It's okay.
That's okay. We can. It's the new way of doing meetings.
Thanks for your patience, Stacy. We're having some technical difficulties with promoting to panelists. Just stand by. Stacy, we're going to have the timer off screen for now. We can get the timer going. We just can't get it to get on the screen. Is that okay?
Not a problem.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, Stacy Valenzuela Kenmore. First, thank you to the Planning Commission for all of you bringing forward so many great points, questions, and concerns for our residents, businesses. It's so appreciated. City Council had adopted affordable housing as their top priorities a few years ago. And Kenmore had extended the 6-month moratorium to not allow any permits in the TOD overlay area, which in previous maps, I thought I saw went up to 68th Northeast after the failure of a developer that failed to include proposed affordable housing. Before it expired, Kenmore currently passed a 6-month moratorium, ordinance 220543 on the TOD overlay to encourage multiple family with requirement of 25% affordable housing units at the 50 and 30% AMI or below minimum. At the Planning Department Developers Panel meeting, most of the developers agreed that requiring the 25% or more units, very low, 50 to 80% or lower AMI affordable housing is reasonable and the only way to increase inventory. I am confused as I think we need that implemented on the TOD comp plan. And I think it should also have in the Kenmore Municipal Code 187730 listed the requirements of 25% units to be affordable housing as per 220543. If we really want action of increasing the affordable housing unit inventory and implementation, Kenmore is the more desirable location. Contingencies should only be going to the developers who fulfill the needs of Kenmore protections preservation and include 25% real low affordable housing. We have seen the cost go up drastically on everything, needing daily to live comfortably. Electricity doubled. There's huge increase in food, gas, taxes. Residents have seen rent increases on those already struggling during COVID. Tenants are forced to live in their cars and abandon their homes as they are being priced out. Our workers in restaurant, coffee shops, grocery stores, senior, disabled, veterans, all desperately need affordable housing. As we have seen, if you have no workers, businesses close. As of 2019, there were 27 out of every 100 units needing to be extremely low affordable housing. 3 years in the pandemic has only made that worse. Again, the developers on the city's planning department panel agreed requiring 25% or more of the units below affordable housing is reasonable and the only way inventory will be increased. I know Kenmore is with a joint project with Plymouth Housing and Arch, but that's only 100 units and those will go fast. We need your help to keep ordinance 220543 with 25% or higher requirements in the housing units and part of the TOD plans. I also think your height limits and your affordable housing ordinance that you put forward is also great and the best way to go and should be adopted in all of the TOD. Only if adding substantial affordable housing where height limits are increased. We are also facing uncertainty.
Thank you, Ms. Valenzuela. Your time is up.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you, Stacy. Appreciate you coming before us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have one more person.
Yes, just give us one moment. Next, we have Nancy.
There she is. Hello, Nancy. Welcome to the Planning Commission. Thank you for coming tonight, and your time will start when you start speaking.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, I've been told that this is regarding the where the R6 is being placed, I guess. And I've been told that some areas have lower densities, like zones R4 and R1, because they have environmentally sensitive areas like steep slopes or wetlands and streams. But the map for R6 in the moorlands and also a lot of the area around Swamp Creek shows that it's left in the R6 zoning, even though there are steep slopes as well as streams and wetlands. So that wasn't clear. And then I'd like to understand why that discrepancy between what we're seeing and what we're told. Now, I asked a city council member about this concern, and she told me that these critical areas would be protected the same as they are now, but that can't happen, as far as I see, if they have more impervious cover due to higher zoning. So I don't think that's protecting these areas by leaving them in the R6 zoning area. So I was wondering what basis was used for making these decisions. Zoning is a huge issue, especially when it happens at such a large percentage of an entire city. What basis is being used for making these decisions? Have scientists or like geologists or wetland specialists been called on? It seems like the soils and groundwater protection should take a higher priority than views. I even heard last night that at the council meeting that some areas were left out of R6 zoning due to views and heights. And I'm guessing that means because someone's view might be blocked. And I'm also seeing that there are views on a lot of the sites that are in the R6 area, and they haven't been considered. So that's not, it doesn't seem consistent or fair. It's just not making good sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and appreciate you being here tonight.
We have one more public commenter, Chris. Chris, you can go ahead. Chris, we're not hearing any sound on our end.
Did he join as panelist?
Yes. Chris, we're going to go ahead and give you another 30 seconds here, and then we're going to have to move on.
Is he unmuted?
Yes.
Oh.
It's gone. Okay. Chris, we're sorry we can't see you or hear you, but you are certainly welcome to send us an email with your comments to our clerk, and she will forward your comments to all of us. So our next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Commissioner Vandeleen, have you read the minutes?
Yes, I have.
Are they good with you?
They are.
Okay, since I was not here for this meeting, is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, without objection, they'll be approved. All right, so our next item on the agenda is, oh, there she is, and I bet you your microphone works. Good evening, Lori.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. And you have a staff memo and many other things that you would like to talk to us about.
I do.
Okay, so the floor is yours. Oh, hi, Debbie. I forgot. I just noticed you down there on the, oh, now you keep moving around, Debbie. That's pretty good. All right, so go ahead.
Okay, well, good evening, Chair Thompson and other members of the Planning Commission. So the topic for tonight is the first set of proposed transit-oriented development, or TOD, amendments. As you know, the current approach in this area, which is north of State Route 522 and east of 73rd Avenue Northeast, and I've got a map that we can pull up if you want to do that at some point. The current approach is that this is what's called an overlay zone. So the TOD standards that talk about densities and heights and parking and a variety of things are optional development standards. And so a person who owns property or wants to develop property in that area can either develop under the existing zoning, and there are 4 zoning districts, or they can choose the TOD overlay. The advantage of the TOD overlay, the way it was structured, was that it's much higher densities, but along with that comes an affordable housing requirement. So the comprehensive plan language that you transmitted to the City Council has policies that suggest that those densities and affordability requirements should become mandatory, no longer an optional approach. That really, as the high capacity transit community and with an interest in affordable housing, those densities should be increased. And when the densities are increased, an affordable housing requirement can be applied. So we're going to talk about several of the standards from the TOD this evening. We're going to talk about density. We're going to talk about connectivity. We're going to talk about design standards. We'll talk about height. We are not this evening going to tackle the question of affordability levels. That is an analysis, and it's related to parking, so we're not going to talk about parking either. That Arch, Mike Stanger with Arch, using the methodology that he described to you all at your last meeting, is doing the analysis, and will be coming back with recommendations at your August 16th meeting. On August 2nd, that's the kickoff for the transportation element. So you'll be looking at goals, objectives, and policies related to transportation. So August 2nd is transportation, and then we'll come back to TOD with the affordability issues and parking on August 16th. So the approach that staff is recommending for making these standards mandatory is not to create a brand new TOD zoning district. What we are suggesting is that, in fact, we would retain commercial zonings, downtown commercial and urban corridor, because those zonings really are focused on commercial uses, with multifamily okay as part of mixed use, but there are a lot of commercial uses that are allowed in those areas. We would suggest that the public, semi-public zone, which in the TOD is applied only to the Kenmore Park and Ride, be retained, and that very specific locational standards be added to that public, semi-public zone that reference that particular property. And the last zoning district, there are actually multiple iterations of the R, or residential zoning district. We would suggest, and we talked a little bit about this when we did the comprehensive plan land use classifications, a new zoning district called urban residential, UR, that would pick up all of the residential zoning districts in the current TOD area, except R1. And R1 would be eliminated from the TOD. So the remaining zones would be R12, R18, and R24. Those zones would be incorporated into, in that area, a new zoning district called UR. So with that, I thought I would go ahead and share my screen. I think it's probably easiest to approach sort of the standards using a table that was in your agenda packet. And I'll call that up, but first I should pause and say, do you have any questions initially?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
No, not you. I've got people here and people
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Nathan.
So Lori, you're saying that R1 would be pulled out of the TOD. I'm looking at the map that was included. I think this was under our comprehensive plan recommendation to the city council with the original TOD overlay. I could be wrong, but the original TOD overlay attachment 3, I think in the back of the packet. So that chunk along 73rd, that would be carved back to just
Right.
those colored areas on
Correct.
attachment 4.
Correct.
And kind of be that small strip just along
Yeah.
the street there. Okay,
Mhm.
I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
I think it's confusing to have the R1 zoning district in the TOD. It's really supposed to be a high density area. And so it seems like the existing high density areas should be the ones flagged for inclusion in the TOD.
No, I was just gonna say, I completely agree. And I had the same thought. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't following these property lines anymore, but following the zoning lines that kind of differ in that weird little area because they kind of wave through.
The other reason that, and I'll just throw this in while we're talking about it, the other reason that we are retaining and amending the DC or downtown commercial zone, there is a piece of DC zoning in the TOD, but that also makes it very easy to transfer a density and affordability standards west to downtown, which is what you all had discussed when we talked about expanding the TOD. So the TOD overlay isn't going anywhere, but the standards, those critical standards, could be expanded west to the downtown area. And I should mention that one of the speakers was talking about view issues. And when the city council discussed the TOD expansion last night, they asked why it didn't go along the entire urban corridor. And you'll remember that in the area west of downtown, the commission had talked about how we most recently updated that urban corridor zoning and put lower height limits with view corridors and that kind of thing. So it was the TOD standards that were not being suggested or recommended to move west of downtown. Okay.
If I may ask a question, just as a point of information and to help my understanding, of course, the city in cooperation with the developer is doing a development for affordable housing at the old Shell area. Is that
Correct.
so? Just my curiosity is with what might or be contemplated in that particular, those pieces of property along that line, would that fall into this type of TOD zoning that we're talking about for housing? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that property, the old Shell property on SR 522 is already zoned downtown commercial. And when Plymouth Housing came in with their proposal, they anticipated doing a development agreement, which is a process where they could modify standards in negotiation with the city council. So they did know that the city was considering this extension of higher densities with affordable housing requirements across downtown. So they're aware of that, but their project was not dependent on making that change. It would make their project easier, but they still may need a development agreement for other reasons.
The development easier, but it would be close to, from an imaginary perspective, close to complying with what we're thinking of making in the TOD.
In terms of density, probably those higher densities. Affordability, that project is 100% affordable at 30% of median, which is very much more aggressive than the TOD standards I think you would be considering.
Okay, so the reason why we don't have to worry about the bench, you guys call it the bench, is because it's already zoned downtown, zoned. Is that correct?
No, the bench, which is on the south side of SR 522 to the west of downtown, is zoned urban corridor west. There are two segments of urban corridor zoning. One is east, and that's in the TOD, and one is west, and that is west of downtown, all along SR 522. And that urban corridor, well, all of the urban corridor zoning was redone. I want to say it was in 2018, but I may be completely wrong there. It may have been quite a bit earlier than that. Looking at different uses, and the idea was to promote office and mixed use multifamily along that part of the corridor, but at heights that would not impact views either from State Route 522 across properties to Lake Washington, but also for properties to the north that look out across the area to Lake Washington. So the issue with that particular area is that there are a lot of very specific regulations about protecting view corridors and controlling heights that did not seem compatible with this higher density, taller TOD approach.
Thank you very much for explaining that. Any other questions for our esteemed staff? I think we're ready to move on, Lori.
Okay, well, I am going to share my screen, always a challenge, and we'll go over this table. I think that's the easiest way. It's in your packet. I think it's on the second page of the staff memo. Okay, you can see my table here in the middle of the screen.
I hope so.
Okay, and can you see the little arrow? This I'm not sure about. Can you see me move this arrow?
Yes.
Okay, Tracy's nodding her head, so I'll assume that you can. So this table was prepared to show the difference between the proposed standards and the TOD standards. So I'm just going to run through this table piece by piece and talk about a little bit of sort of differences and unusual approaches in these various zones. And then we'll pause again and you'll have lots of questions. So in the TOD, the minimum density is 60 dwelling units per acre. And you'll recall from the developer panel that there were no concerns expressed about minimum density. We asked that question specifically. Because of that, I've added a similar minimum, well, the same minimum density to this new urban residential UR zone, UC Urban Corridor East, and downtown commercial. Where I haven't put a minimum density is in the public, semi-public zone. And it's important to note that this particular zoning district is found throughout the city. It's the zoning district that goes over school properties. It goes over parks, etc. So this zoning district can be found throughout the community. And at the moment, multifamily is not a outright permitted use in the PSP zone. So the approach that staff has taken is to add multifamily as a permitted use in the PSP zone, and I'll explain why in a minute, but not to put a minimum density on it. So why did we want to add multifamily to the PSP zone? The primary reason is that the park and ride lot, the Kenmore Park and Ride lot, is the subject of current study by Metro, Sound Transit, and the city for a potential integrated mixed-use development focused on the transit station there. It would include housing, It would include parking stalls to replace those lost in the park and ride potentially, but it definitely would include residential and some component of affordable housing. So that's a piece of PSP property where multifamily uses need to be allowed. There are a couple of other PSP properties. They're surplus properties owned by NUD and the fire district, and they haven't told us that they're going to surplus the properties. But staff feels that those particular properties are in residential zones. In fact, they're surrounded by the new R6 medium density housing area. And so the proposal would be in those areas to, again, allow multifamily, but use the standards of the surrounding zoning to determine heights, setbacks, etc. Okay, so that's why there's no minimum density applied. So turning to maximum residential density, the TOD standard is 150 dwelling units per acre. And that has been applied in the staff recommendation across the board. There's an asterisk here in the PSP zone that if you look down here says in some locations. So again, 150 dwelling units per acre is not appropriate in, for example, these surplus properties in different parts of the city, but it is very appropriate on the park and ride property. So that's called out in the standards. Okay, height, the current height in the TOD is 65 feet. And this is an issue that the TOD developer panel did bring up. And I have TBD here because later in this agenda, we want to talk about some height issues and get some preliminary policy direction from the commission. So staff does not have a recommendation to put in these boxes yet. Affordability would be required across the board. Again, we'll be discussing that on August 16th. In the PSP zone, there would be particular locations, park and ride, where that would be required. There's less parking in the TOD. Again, that is tied to the question of affordability. So we're saving that until August 16th. Design standards would be, it's a standard one, the most stringent design standard in the TOD. Some of these properties like DC already have that standard in place, so nothing has to be changed. But in other places, we do need to make sure that standard one is applied. Connectivity, this talks about the importance of pedestrian connections. Again, applied in these other zones, not applied in downtown, where there are specific rules that talk about how wide sidewalks should be, etc. So it didn't seem appropriate given sort of the grid, semi-grid pattern downtown to be talking about trails along critical areas and that kind of thing. So that standard was not applied in the staff recommendation to downtown commercial. And then tree protection, the TOD standards increase tree protection. It's an incentive. If you protect tree groves, you can either have more parking or more density. So we went ahead and applied that standard in the other zoning districts, but did not apply that in the downtown because in the zoning code, there's already a section for downtown commercial and downtown residential that talks about parking reductions if you preserve trees. So there's already a standard specific to the downtown commercial zone that addresses that. Okay, so let me make sure that I captured all of the points I wanted to make with this. Oh, I did want to say that the TOD developers panel, they suggested looking at the issue of an FAR. Do you remember our discussion of what FAR is? They said, well, why don't you look at that instead of looking at maximum height and density? If you use FAR, it allows you a certain floor space in there, and you can put as many units in that floor space as you want. It's It's a different way to approach development. Staff at this time is recommending against that. We don't use FAR really anywhere else. You'll remember that we talked about an FAR in the downtown commercial zone, and it's possible that that could be picked up as part of that project. But at this time, to develop FARs for these 4 zones would really be beyond the scope of the project that we're facing. So,
Lori, for the public, could you just say what FAR stands for and what it means in like 2 sentences?
yeah, I wish. So I'll tell you what floor area ratio is. Floor area ratio is addressing the size of a project based on the size of the property. So 1 FAR means that you can build as many square feet of building as you have on your property. That's 1 FAR. If you have a 0.5 floor area ratio or FAR, that means you can build as much floor area as half the size of your property. So if you have a 10,000 square foot property, you can have 5,000 square feet of building. And it doesn't really talk about the configuration. That's just how much floor area you get. It can go the other way. If you have a property that has a 2 FAR, that means you get 2 times the square footage of the size of your property. So if you have that 5,000 square foot or a 10,000 square foot property, you can build 20,000 square feet of building. And you can see that that would have to lead you to multiple stories. You couldn't do it on a single property because your property is only 10,000 square feet. Did that help? That was like 5 sentences.
No, but it was very concise. And I know that some of our public, when we start talking about FARs and certain stuff like that, the lingo can be pretty tough unless we have some people that have been with us meeting after meeting, which there are a few, but not a lot. Thank you very much, Lori.
You bet. So are there other questions about the table, or I'll stop sharing the screen so you all can see each other?
Nathan has a question.
This is just a quick clarifying thing. Lori, will we be talking about height requirements then coming up soon?
We're going to talk about policy issues related to height as a next part of tonight's discussion.
Okay, so maybe I'll hold off my question until we get there.
Okay.
Rita, I can't see the rest of the commission, so you'll
Okay,
need to
I'm going to
help
stop
me.
sharing my screen. And now I think.
Mike, please.
Commissioner Vanderlyn, you're muted. You're muted.
There we go.
Now you're on. There you go.
Clarifying question, Lori. The standards that are shown in the table you just worked through us, those are the current standards that would become mandatory standards. They're optional today.
Correct.
We're talking about making those mandatory, and we're going to have some further discussion about refining those.
Correct.
Thank
Are
you.
there any other comments or questions?
This is Mariel. I do have one question for clarification. Lori, thank you so much for that excellent explanation of FAR. That was lovely. I just wanted to clarify, in the memo you mentioned that determining an appropriate FAR for multiple zoning districts would be a significant research project beyond the scope of this project. Then is there the intent down the line to research this for potential implementation?
There's not a project on the docket to do that. What I was suggesting is do you remember that there was a policy that talked about applying a minimum FAR in the downtown to result in multi-story buildings? We had that conversation about looking at developing an FAR so that in the downtown area, you wouldn't be able to build a single story building. You would have to have at least 2 stories. So that's an FAR research project. And the downtown commercial area is part of these TOD standards. So at least in that zoning district, I think there is a push to look at FAR. And if that happens, then maybe that will give us some insights into how it could be applied in other places in the city where it is not currently.
Okay, anyone else? Hearing or seeing none? Great, we're off to the next step.
Okay. Well, the next step really is to address two major sections of the regulations. One is height, and the other one is incentives. And so I need some early feedback. These are policy questions related to maximum height and to incentives. So I have given you some background. I'll go over that. And then I had a series of questions that from staff's perspective, we needed responses to move ahead with the regulations. So I mentioned that the current height limit is 65 feet, unless it's against single family zoning. And in that case, for some distance, it drops to 35 feet, which is the traditional single family zoning height. Okay, so standard is called 5/2 construction. All it means is that you can build 2 floors of concrete, and then you can build 5 floors of wood construction over it, and it's still safe. You know, at a certain point when you're making a building totally out of wood, it's too wobbly. It doesn't work. So the building code standards allow 5/2 construction. So 5 floors of wood over 2 floors of concrete, and those concrete floors are called the podium. If you do extra things, I checked with our building reviewer, you can get to 6/2 construction if you're doing a really good job with your building approach. But standard 5/2 construction requires a height of up to 75 feet. And so that is one consideration. And 5/2 is the most common multifamily construction we see. You see those buildings all the time. If you increase it to 80, then you could probably do this 6/2 construction to 80 feet. So panelists at the forum, the developer panel, most of them requested a 75-foot height limit. That's what they have in mind. There was one participant who thought that if you would go to the very maximum 85 feet, and that number is specified in the building code, 85 feet, then you would give somebody more flexibility to do what they wanted with their building. And another participant said, hey, we have issues about a high water table in portions of this area, and we don't want to build down. So as much height as we get would be useful for us. So what are we talking about? We're talking about between 6 stories and 7. I'm not sure you can get, yes, you can get to 8. So we're talking between 6 stories at 65 feet and 8 stories at 85 feet. And I included in your attachment 5 some examples of projects that were of that size and scale. In this particular area, there aren't view blockage issues. It's kind of an aesthetic issue about how the street feels. We want this to be a pedestrian activated area on the one hand. On the other hand, we apply our very most stringent design standards to this area that talk about building setbacks and building articulation, which means that the building has some variances in form to make it more interesting. So those kind of standards work to mitigate the impact of a tall building. And staff's conclusion was, because we don't have these view issues, that probably we would recommend going to the maximum, going to 85 feet. I then looked at some neighboring jurisdictions because I thought you might be interested to know what other places were doing. In downtown Kirkland, heights can be up to 115 feet or a maximum of 8 stories. Now, again, above 85 feet, I think it probably has to be steel construction, at least from what I understood from our building reviewer. In Juanita Village, you all know where Juanita Village is, also in Kirkland. That has height limits up to 78 feet. And the city just is passing some new height regulations around the Northeast 85th Street interchange with I-405. That's where it's kind of where the Costco used to be, Lee Johnson Chevrolet, right at that intersection, because they're getting BRT there. And they have just approved zoning with maximum heights ranging from 85 feet to 250 feet. That's pretty significant. And again, to get to 250 feet, they have a menu of great things, I guess, that you have to do to get up to that height. But that's definitely steel construction. That's not wood frame construction. And then in Bothell, the downtown Bothell height limit is at 76 feet or 6 stories. Some places say you can get up to this height limit, but we also are limiting you to stories so that both standards are used. So some considerations as we think about height, certainly the Heron Rookery is an issue. And then I think also the relationship between heights in this TOD, the current main TOD area by the Park and Ride, and between that area and between downtown, which is the heart of our city, and includes Lake Point to the south, we should probably be thinking a little bit about those relationships. You'll remember Joe Minicozy and his pyramid, and that pyramid was talking about something completely different, economic development, but it did indicate that the higher densities, the higher heights are in the center of the city. So I then had a series of 3 questions, but before we start that, are there any observations?
Commissioners? Hey, silence rules tonight. Oh, there's, you know, I still got to get used to not looking at the screen. Commissioner Nathan?
This is a comment. It's not a question or anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were some gasps on this side when we heard about the 200 some foot over in Kirkland. And I just want to make a comment that, you know, while we see that that is pretty significant, I don't think the city is quite at that point. And I don't think that's even on our table tonight. You know, I think staff's recommendation is the maximum is 85. And I'm, you know, although we're hearing these other values, Kenmore's not quite at the same place that Kirkland is. Although I did have a question that does come to mind now that I'm talking about this. Do you happen to know, Lori, off the top of your head, why Juanita and Bothell chose those more obscure numbers like 76 and 78 instead of 75? Or
I don't. Sometimes there's this question of what how tall the first floor should be. There's kind of, it's called plate heights, and you want a taller plate height if you're having retail on the first floor than I suppose if you're having office or some other use. So there are different ways to figure out how tall or how many stories. And I don't know why they chose those numbers. If you want me to check into that, I can do my best.
No, that's okay. I was just curious if you happen to know off the top of your head.
I don't.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I see Commissioner Bonish.
Oh, there's a yellow hand up there. Commissioner Tracy.
Thank you. Lori, this is, you said this, I heard you say it, and I'm just asking you to just repeat it because I'm trying to incorporate it into my thinking here.
Okay.
So, and it will help me, 65, so the ones that we're considering mostly seem to be 65, 75, and 85 feet, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so up 65 feet, you said it could result in about 6 stories. Is that what you
Mhm.
said?
I would say 5 or 6.
5 or 6 stories. And then
Yeah, if you go to 6 stories, that means probably 10-foot plate heights. I'm not sure you could easily do retail on the ground floor, which maybe is 12 to 15 feet. So
Okay.
you can see here's where
on what the
um,
use is that
these
what-
different things come together.
Okay, and so the 75 feet would be about 6 to 7 stories? Is that what you're-
75 would allow this 5/2 construction.
Okay, 7 stories. Okay, 5, so that'd be 7 stories. And then the 85 feet would result in about 8.
Again, it could be
7
7,
to
it could be 8.
Okay, that just helps me.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you so much for that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Mike.
All right, question. I have no objection, or I'm supportive of increasing the heights. 2 things I wanted to maybe know more about, I have a little more assurance on. One is, to the extent that we have higher buildings next to residential neighborhoods on the border, want to understand how we protect that. Also, I want to make sure are we talking about multifamily, or this must be mixed use? I'm concerned about where we are in terms of the retail environment and the ability to be able to do.
So we're talking about probably the UR, it's primarily multifamily. In urban corridor and in downtown commercial, and potentially on that PSP property, the park and ride, it would be mixed use.
It would seem, are you done, Mike? I
Yes,
didn't want to butt in, okay. So it seems, Commissioner Nathan. No, you go ahead and have a question.
Lori, this is a clarifying point. So when it comes to the Heron Rookery, I think I read that it was kind of a case-by-case basis and things would be evaluated when they're close to the Rookery. Is that correct?
That was staff's recommendation. If the commission, well, we could do a step back. There's currently sort of a step back in the regulations that talk about within a certain distance of single family zoning, there should be maybe a more limited height. And then there's also in the design standards some rules about step backs and that kind of thing. The fear in terms of identifying a setback or a step back is that what would we base it on? We don't have the expertise or the understanding of the Heron Rookery to make that kind of a call. And the way we approach the Heron Rookery with other kinds of development is that the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife looks at what's called a habitat management plan when a new proposal comes in that is within 600 feet of the rookery. And they identify mitigating measures that are needed or issues that must be addressed to protect the rookery. So in that case, it's analyzed and the standards are put in place by people who are experts in Heron rookeries and what they need and don't need. So staff felt that it was a more comfortable position to be in to say we need input from the experts to tell us what the height should be and whether these heights are going to be a deterrent, which could be looked at, depending on a case-by-case basis. Where is the property? What is the proposal? And what is needed?
And would that assessment by the state, could that override potentially some of the other requirements within the TOD? Say, for instance, if they're limited to 35 feet or something, it's very hard for them to potentially meet that 60 unit goal or whatever it is, depending on the size of the lot.
So the habitat management plan is part of the whole environmental review for a project. And those standards direct how the project can proceed. And yes, it can increase setbacks, it could decrease height, etc., if needed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mike.
Yeah, Lori, who owns the Heron Rookery land today?
I
Oh, the-
believe it's in a couple different ownerships. I think that part of it is in an easement on the back of the Mary's Place, the former sheriff's
Mhm.
office property. And then it may also be partially on protected tracks and easements that are behind those properties just to the north of that. So there's not one entity that owns the Heron Rookery that I know of. Debbie's going to jump in if, if she knows something different, but
No, that's my understanding too. It's
Yeah.
not on common property.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Are there other questions? Oh, Commissioner Tracy.
Thank you. I do have a question about the high water table that is in that area.
Mhm. And I don't have specific information about that. That was a comment
Right.
from a panelist. I haven't seen a development proposal. I don't know what the water table situation is there or on what properties. I truly don't know.
Yeah. That's something that we would know when a development proposal came in. Is that right? Because they would have to make an assessment.
Yeah,
Okay. I'm guessing that it's high, like
Mhm.
like I'm guessing that it's quite
certainly where it's located, you can
because
see
of where
that.
it's located. Yeah. And because those properties that you referenced, the Mary's Place property, the back of the park and ride lot,
Mhm.
there's often standing water in them. So I like,
Right.
you know, that like they're really, you know, we've covered them up and paved them, but they really are, they kind of want to be part of that nice wetland that we have back there, you know, like they're trying.
Yeah,
hard.
I know what you're talking about.
So I guess like thinking about that in terms of a request for extra height, I just wonder how we balance. I understand why somebody would want extra height there because they can't go down, right? But then I also wonder what granting extra height there, what that would do to the ecological services that the water table is telling us something about what the earth is there, and groundwater is really important, and healthy groundwater is really important for our health. So I'm wondering about those trade-offs. And I guess we can't really know because you don't know exactly what the water table is like there.
Right. I would say that, if a development came in and there were water table or other kinds of issues that required some sort of special construction, I mean, I could see that happening, that you would need to, I don't know, would you have to do pilings? I'm not sure. I don't know. But in terms of the construction, I don't think it's an issue for the construction. And if they weren't digging out the area, I'm not sure it would be really an issue for the water table. There might be some piers or pilings that went down through it, but I don't quite see the connection there.
I think the connection that I'm making is that we don't dig down there, right? Because that would result in water kind of coming up into basements and mold
Mhm.
problems and things like that, and maybe cracked foundations. I don't know, whatever, if the water gets
Right.
in. It just feels like intuitively, and maybe I need to do more reading on this admittedly, because this is a new area of learning for me, but intuitively it seems like a high water table area is like probably, it doesn't intuitively seem to me to be a good place to put really, really tall buildings, I guess. Because that's a lot of pressure on the land, I guess, with increased density and all the construction stuff. But again, this is just my intuition, and I plan to continue reading on it.
Mhm.
And if anybody has any information, I'm very happy to learn from you.
I don't have any information, but I agree with Laurie. It's something that I don't think you can sort of regulate with because it's a property specific condition. And being as you don't know what kind of development would occur there or anything like that, I think you would have to wait to do the site specific analysis and evaluate the impacts of the specific proposal at the time. And then figure out if it was feasible. And obviously, if it's not feasible, then you're not going to build it, or if there are any mitigating circumstances to build it. So I don't think we'll be able to get a definitive answer to your concern, Tracy, because I really think it's based on a specific proposal.
Thank you.
Further discussion? I was wondering where we would find those step backs or whatever you were calling them with regard to heights from residential zoning.
Right.
situation.
So let me grab my copy here. And it's easiest to see the changes in the urban corridor, or not the urban corridor, the urban residential zone, because that those standards were written right off of the TOD overlay standards. They're kind of a modification of the TOD overlay standards. So if you want to look at the urban residential UR zone, that's on page 15. I actually, do you want me to share my screen or do you want to look at it? You can, what's your pleasure? If I share my screen, you can't see each other. Okay, well, if everybody has their document in front of you, if you go to page 15, that's the urban residential zone, and then you're going to thumb through to page 20. And that's where there's this table. It's a standard table in all of the zoning districts that talks about setbacks and height, etc. So if you look under maximum height, there's a footnote referenced. And then if you go down on the bottom of the last section on page 20, talks about, oh, this is the this is the setback relationship, but look at footnote. It's now footnote 1. It was previously footnote 2. Portions of any property that are within 50 feet of a single family zone, R1, R4, R6. And I should fix that to say a residential zone. So I'm going to make a note to myself because R6 now contains potentially some other uses. Shall have a maximum height of 35 feet within that area to provide a transition in height to the lower intensity uses. So for the first 50 feet from the single family zone, the height has to drop to 35 feet. So that's one place where there's a step back. And then also in the design standards, that's a different chapter of the zoning code. There are step back above a certain height. You have to be set back, I think, 10 feet, etc. It's a way to make it more pedestrian friendly when you're down on the street.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any further questions or discussion? So are you wanting us to make a recommendation?
So what I was hoping for was just some general policy direction from the commission. I had 3 height related questions. I'm just trying to kind of take the temperature of the room in terms of should heights be increased above 65 feet? Again, knowing that there are these caveats about step backs and the rookery, and et cetera. If the commission is ready to say, we're ready to look at a height increase, again, staff is saying, let's go all the way to 85 feet. But generally, are you interested in a higher height, and do you have a preferred height limit?
So how about we start with who, and let's just have a discussion, not of what the limit would be, but would commissioners entertain with the correct, conditions, a height increase? Let's just put it in general at this point.
Excuse me, this is Mariel. Just before we go and enter into this conversation, I did notice that Tracy had her hand up before Lori's explanation. I just wanted to make sure if she had a question or comment that we addressed it.
Commissioner Tracy, I missed you in the corner of my screen.
That's okay. I did put my hand down. So again, this is just because I'm trying to translate this information into a way that my brain kind of like can visualize it. I think that's what it is. I'm trying to visualize it. Do you know, with these wonderful, really wonderful pictures that you provided at the end of our packet, do you happen to know how tall you have the number of stories that they are, but do you happen to know how tall they are? I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting you to.
Yes. I really wanted that number.
Okay.
Because I think it makes it way easier.
Yeah.
But I could not get that number.
Okay.
For the projects in Kenmore, I have the numbers.
Yeah.
I think, for example, I think I want to say the Link building is 77 feet. I'd have to double check that. That project was higher than the height limit because they got an extra height approved through the development agreement process. So they aren't following the current zoning rules. They got a special dispensation. And I don't have my piece of paper right here, but I could get those numbers. And I want to say that Spencer Square is 65. I want to say it's 60. It is 65 or 68. And then the Link is like 77. I'm pretty sure. And part of that is because it has that really steeply pitched roof. So it's not true stories. And on the back side of the building is the underground parking. So there are actually 2 stories of that concrete podium, but along the street, it's underground. And then at the back of the building, you can see it. But I don't for the other buildings. I truly don't.
Yeah. I like I said, I wouldn't expect you to, but thank you for entertaining the question.
Along that line, the new condominiums or apartments are being built back by the church off of 68th. What's the maximum height there?
I think those are 68th behind the church. I want to say that particular zoning district, that's one of our multifamily zoning districts. I'm fairly certain. And so I'm casting back to our very first table. 60 feet is the standard in the multifamily zoning districts, if that's what that property is zoned. And you can go up to a higher height in some cases, but 60 feet is the standard. And I can get that exact information for you for your next meeting.
Okay, is there a suggestion from commissioners on what type of, how they want to look at this? Or are they prepared to provide advice to our staff tonight? Or are we looking at, now Lori, don't cringe, maybe looking at it, well, actually coming back with a more firmer answer next meeting?
Think if the commission could give us some indication so that we can kind of firm up an answer. I think we've given you some options and the pros and cons of those, and getting a little bit of if there is some sort of consensus or direction, or even if there's a couple of options, at least then we'll be able to use that to firm up a response.
I got the drift, Debbie. Thank you. Commissioner Derrick here.
Before we decide on going taller on buildings, how tall is Kenmore's tallest fire ladder?
I have no idea. That is certainly a question that I do not know the answer to.
All right.
All right, Commissioner Mike.
Thanks, Derek. That actually prompted a question for me. If our current ladder isn't tall enough, who has to buy the new one? All right, serious question. All right, just some feedback. I like the idea of allowing the height and would be willing to go up to the 85 because in the case that would provide additional flexibility and maybe increase the chance of getting some development in there. The conditions or caveats in my mind there, we'd have to be assured that we're getting significant new affordable housing for that new increase, and we have to understand what that is and how that we get to that. And then again, making sure that when we approve these and reviewed them, that we have the significant buffers in place to protect the nearby residential neighborhoods.
I believe Commissioner Tracy had her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I feel in terms of where we are in terms of climate and environment that going taller where appropriate, it feels like that's where we need to go. I do have some concerns about that. And I think as Mike was saying, my support would have to be, you know, with some caveats. Like I'm very concerned about holding up our value of people-oriented development. And I know sometimes tall buildings, depending on how they're built, can be less people-friendly than shorter buildings. Even I think there's sometimes even a difference between like a 6-story building and a 7 or 8. That seems to be like the threshold I've been reading about where, you know, where it kind of tips. So I'm concerned about that. I am concerned about also the Heron Rookery. I'm heartened to hear the recommendation that we look to science-based evidence to make decisions there. But I do continue to hold that concern there. I also am concerned about, I do think that we need density and I want to find it. Just want to find the right places for it. And I know because of historical factors that TOD area and along 522, that seems like it is a good area. I just have some lingering concerns about the fact that it is so close to the Heron Rookery, that gorgeous big wetland. You know, Swamp Creek does come right through there. It is not an area that is without critical areas. And so that is also something that I think about a lot. You know, like I'd like to find the right place for the density. And it feels like this is not necessarily like a slam dunk in my mind in terms of all these other factors. So those are the things that I'm thinking of.
Further discussion. Commissioner Nate.
To plainly answer question 1, at least my answer for that, Lori, I would agree. I would say, yes, I'm on board with increasing the height above 65 feet.
Anyone else wish to comment? Okay, Christiana, Commissioner.
Are any of these areas next to residential homes, just single family residences?
I think that maybe on, let me grab my zoning map, on the east end, there is some single family just to the north. Let me call up the zoning map because I think this might actually help look at this question. So I am going to share my screen again. Sorry.
One of those things that just has to happen.
It just has to happen. I'm sorry to say. And here is the zoning map. Okay, so the TOD, you can see my arrow, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the TOD picks up this area here and around this commercial zoning. This is all R1. This is the Swamp Creek wetlands. So there's, as far as I know, unless there's a totally non-conforming development in here, this is not developed with residential. This is residential zoning. You can see there are a couple of parcels right here. That's R4. This is R6 zoning. It looks like a sort of a small lot, single family development. These are single family lots. And again, these are single family lots right in this area.
Yep.
So the other thing I can say is that there are a number of these parcels in this particular area, and maybe we should look at the aerial, that are already developed with multifamily complexes. And so there is also the question of, realistically, would these well-developed condos, apartments, whatever they are, would they actually redevelop to different kinds of uses? So I think maybe what I could bring back next time that would be useful would be an aerial that we can really zoom in and sort of see what the development looks like. And then I think we have that vacant and redevelopable land map that we looked at when we were looking at urban growth capacity. And maybe that would give us some insights as well. So I will try to include those two items in your packet next time. I'll provide a link to the aerial because that otherwise you won't be able to zoom in and really see what's going on. Would you find that helpful? Would that be useful?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm hearing at least three I'm seeing
Oh,
at
yes.
least. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Okay, all right.
So if there is no further questions of our staff, might I summarize a position which we might safely take tonight is that I hear that the commission is willing to consider heights above 65 feet as long as environmentally sensitive areas such as the rookery and the wetlands are sufficiently addressed, and that the setbacks and how transition to residential neighborhoods are addressed, and that we have can I finish, Christiana? And that we have a better understanding of what the different heights would really mean, and maybe with some of those pictures, a clearer concept of how high those pictures represent that you've provided for us on our handout as an example. Now, Christiana, you had your hand up first, and then there's Mariel. So I'm open to any additions to that, or if you don't like what I suggested, please speak up.
For me, when Mike was speaking about the caveats, and for me, the concern would be putting in 85-story buildings next to single family homes without really mitigating some of the things that are going to happen to those single family homes with such large structures going in next to them. So how can we mitigate some of the life altering things that will happen to the residents who live next to these giant structures being built next door to them was my concern.
I think that
I think
should be
also-
included. I think that's a lot of us have voiced that very same concern. So feel free to add the specifics of Christiana's and Mike's words to the stuff that I said. Okay, Mariel, go ahead.
Thank you. I think one other thing I also heard when Mike was speaking, and I know this is a concern of mine, that if we are making this adjustment and allowing for an increase in heights, is the question of affordable housing and making sure that it's assured. So if we're increasing, I guess, the density and we're increasing in the heights, that we need to have assurances of affordable housing being built and being part of these constructions.
I see a lot of heads nodding, so we should add that as an additional point to the summary statement. Commissioner Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe get some clarification from Lori or Debbie. The habitat study that would be done, I'm assuming for any development that was near the rookery or the wetlands, would that include some analysis of what the impact might be on the access, flyway access into those properties, or into the wetlands and the rookery? And my concern here is if you put up very large buildings next to them, you're going to restrict the access. You're going to create a dangerous flyway situation. So is that something that would be considered in that study?
I don't know all the components of the habitat study, but I would think that would certainly be a lack if it wasn't included. I mean, that seems to me to be one of the most critical issues is protecting the flyway.
Sure. When does that study actually happen? Would we have that before we came up with final recommendations, or would that come sometime later?
It wouldn't be for the area. It's on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so it'd have to be a development proposal.
Right. So there's a proposal, and then the habitat management plan has to be developed and then reviewed to address issues.
Can we, in our recommendations, create either some statute language or language in our zoning that would cover that as a requirement?
Yeah, I think there is already in the critical area rules, it talks about a habitat management plan within a certain distance, but we could refer to that code section and then specifically call out, for example, issues of flyway and access.
Thank you. Perfect.
Commissioner Tracy.
Thank you, Dwight. I thought that your summary was great with the additions of all the commissioners who have spoken. I agree with all those additions. And I just also wanted to make sure that we got in our value of people-oriented places in there as well with Word. I know it's in spirit with all of us, but otherwise I thought your summary was really great. Thank you. And then this is just a question that I had after listening to Mike's question. Are there not, I know that we have a science-based, buffer widths. Are there no such similar, just kind of general here in Rookery, like flyaway? Is there, the science just doesn't have anything like that? No? Okay.
No, the way it's phrased in our critical area rules is, again, you have to do a habitat management plan that identify if you're within a certain distance. So if you're within, I think it's 600 feet. In fact, I think most recent science says 600 feet is the distance. And so if you're within that area, then you get the habitat management plan that looks at impacts and mitigation. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner Nate.
Lori, I want to jump back to table B really quick when it comes, I think that was page 20. So I see the footnotes up there when it comes to, what do we talk about? Height regarding distance from single family zones. Would a similar footnote be appropriate up towards the minimum and maximum density that kind of correlates with that other footnote as well? My thinking here is, if you say that they have to reduce the maximum height of their property to 35 feet, but still require the minimum density of 60 units, it's not quite proportional in terms of whatever height we decide with the minimum density of 60 units. Do you kind of understand what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I guess I'm relying on our panel of experts, and none of them expressed any concern with the minimum density. That did not seem to be an issue with them, even though they had our current rules that address those setbacks and height limitations. So they at least did not flag that as an issue.
Okay, it just kind of stuck out to me as it didn't quite make sense. If you're kind of making a caveat to this height requirement, why isn't there a similar one to the density requirement? But if the panel of experts, didn't pick up on that, then, I'll defer to them when it comes to that.
I would say that I also intend, once we get farther along with our draft after August 16th, probably, I think that they're all on the mailing list. I think we added them all to the Planning Commission mailing list, but I intend to send a very specific individual email to our participants to say, here are the changes that are being considered. Could you give us some feedback?
Thank you. And this was kind of building off what Commissioner Christiana had talked about, that life altering change, and how we were talking about, reducing the height to 35. I think it would still be significant with a reduction in density that kind of matched that. So it was an easier transition from those residential properties to the TOD or whatever it is.
I would, from a staff perspective, not recommend any internal to the site density differences between portions of a building. That is the kind of a code approach that would be exceedingly difficult to administer. So if we want to have them set the building back, if we want to make the building shorter, it's automatically going to force their density to another part of the site. But I would not recommend saying, okay, within 50 feet of single family, your density is now only 20 dwelling units per acre. That would be very difficult for a reviewer to administer.
Of course, no, I completely understand. I was just trying to process that whole transition aspect of it, but thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So back to the rookery for me. One of my other concerns is, okay, so we have a development to the east, let's just say. And so they do this evaluation and they set requirements for that development to the east. What I'm concerned about is further degradation above what was considered when they do a development to the west. And I'm just thinking that maybe we should spell out the requirements somewhere that if one side of that is developed, that the management plan, habitat management plan needs to address further development that could be done in that flyway, so that we don't have degradation of that flyway just because it wasn't considered in the first plan. Does that make sense to you, Lori?
I think we could talk about in this section where we would, for example, refer to the habitat management plan and add our special concerns about the flyway. I think that adding something about cumulative impacts of ongoing development is a place to put that. I would say that, once a building is permitted, then the next building that comes in has to go through the habitat management plan, and they're going to be aware of the first building. You see what I'm saying? So in analyzing the habitat management plan, they're already going to know what the existing conditions are. That will be part of the review. So it's not like they put blinders on and well, we're just going to look at this one property, and it's assessing this whole circular area, the 600-foot area, for impacts that could negatively impact the rookery. So I think it's always good to call out special concerns, flyway, cumulative impacts, etc. But I don't think that we would have someone come in with a development and then make assumptions about all the other development that would occur, because we do it kind of in the reverse. The first one gets the analysis, then the second one gets the analysis with the impacts of the first building. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I see what you're saying, and I understand that. However, it's kind of like the trees in Kenmore. It's a cumulative effect of the trees being cut down, and we need something clear to be sure that in what you're suggesting is calling out that flyway so that it's considered so that cumulative degradation does not occur. I'm okay with that, but that's, in comparison, the flyway to trees to streams, all of that stuff. But this particular one is critical in my view. Tracy?
I just want to say that I support that, Dwight. I think I support strongly the consideration of cumulative impacts. Thank you for bringing that up.
Commissioner Nate.
Kind of going on a similar track here. So Lori, I believe that the rookery that's in an R1 zone, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so we talked about earlier the footnote about portions of any property within 50 feet of a residential area. The height maximum would be 35 feet. Does that include around the rookery as well?
It would be 35 feet from that boundary of the R1 to the south.
Well, 50 feet from the boundary, but a 35-foot maximum?
Oh, right. It's right. 50 feet and then 35 feet. Yeah.
Okay. And so that would kind of be a 50-foot buffer around that R1 rookery, unless whatever the scientists say, unless they say it should be lower than that, correct? So, okay.
So I'm thinking out loud, and I can't make promises, but I'm pondering whether it would be possible to call our contact at WDFW and just say, here's what we're talking about. Here's the approach. Do you see any immediate red flags? And just, they're not going to be able to give us the answer, but at least I can talk with them about, are there issues that we should put in our caveat that we're going to put about these height limits, get their help up front, even though they're not doing the analysis of a specific building, to help us adequately frame the issue. Okay, so again, I can't promise that I'm going to get a hold of this person and they're going to help me with this question. They may say, nope, sorry, we only do it on a case-by-case, development-by-development basis, but I'll try. I mean, they're the experts, so.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of clarify and point out that although we didn't address it when we were talking about the residential zones, the R4 and R6, I think more east on that side, that 35-foot maximum would still apply around the rookery unless the case-by-case basis put it even lower than that.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's a great approach, Lori, and I see a lot of heads nodding up and down. Thank you for offering that. And Commissioner Derrick.
Yeah, my skeptical side is noticing, unless I've missed it, there's not a stepped approach to that 50-foot setback for the 35-foot cap. And I'm wondering if a developer can start 51 feet back and go for the full 65 feet currently.
Yep.
Or could we put in some sort of a 50 feet, you can go to 35 feet, at 100 feet, you can go to 50 feet, something along those lines?
You could certainly do a step back like that. I think that would be a potential issue for some properties there that may not have the capacity to do multiple step backs. They're just not big enough. There's not enough distance. And I also, I want to encourage the commission to think about the point of this. We are trying to cram this density in right on the BRT line. So if we start putting in too many ways to modify the shape of the building, then we're constraining even more than currently how much development can happen there. So already the rule is 50 feet, 35 feet, but then you can go to 65. If you say 50 feet, 35 feet, and now it's another 50 feet that you can go 50 feet, you see we've chopped off a chunk of building right there. So I would hesitate to go backward in that way.
Yeah, I guess I was just looking for clarification that I didn't miss something in there.
No, you didn't at all. That's exactly right.
Okay, all right.
On that point, this all is going to come around again to us. We're just giving you some parameters tonight.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
Just like what we've done when we finally got rid of that last docket item.
You did such a good job with that.
Oh, goodness. Right. So if there's no further comments, we'll make that summary that I had put toward with, and you feel free to add some of Mike's distinguished language to that, as well as the points that were made afterwards. I think that you have that, and then you'll put that together in the minutes, and then we'll look it over next meeting, just to make sure what's in the minutes and what we thought we said is the same thing. How's that?
Okay. We are usually not doing that level of detailed minutes, but certainly as I tackle the staff memo on the topic, I'm happy to reiterate the points that I think I heard, and I have kind of a whole page covered with stars, which means these are things I need to research.
We're good with that. Is there any objection to that? I just want to make sure we have a chance to see what you thought you heard.
Yeah.
So, because it's not that easy. So we have one more set of policy talking about development incentives that you want us to.
So this is let me finish making my note here. So these questions are related to development incentives, and there are just two of them. So the current TOD standards provide incentives in a couple places. Tree growth preservation is one, and then that I've incorporated into the new standards. But another one is reduced parking requirements for what's called a pioneer project. So the pioneer project was supposed to be the first 100 units developed in the TOD. So we haven't had a pioneer project, but we've had several pre-applications related to potential pioneer projects. And you probably can see right away that it's been kind of an administrative nightmare, because who is the pioneer project? It says it's the first 100 units, but if you have a project that has 70 units, and then you have another project that has 50 units, it's hard. And you have people saying, well, what's my parking? It's like, well, I don't know, because I don't know who the Pioneer Project is. So staff is recommending that, in fact, you do away with the Pioneer Project incentive because it's hard to administer. And what we heard from the panel was that Kenmore is positioned. We're in a good position. The BRT is coming in a couple of years. We've certainly had interest. So I'm not sure we need a Pioneer Project incentive if we increase height, etc. So reactions to that?
Commissioner Nathan.
It's my personal position that I'm perfectly on board with doing away with the Pioneer Project, just as you recommend, Lori. Like you said, we're in a good position, and if we take away that overlay and now require these different aspects integrated within the new densities, and there's no point to have a Pioneer Project. I mean, everyone's going to have to be required to do these things. So there's no more that we don't need that carrot anymore. We're at the stick point of this discussion. And so, and also I think by verbally saying, hey, we're doing away with this Pioneer Project, you know, maybe those developers will say, well, we have until these recommendations come before the city council or whatever to actually do away with the Pioneer Project to try and get this done as quickly as possible. So now that puts a little fire into the feet of the developers that are currently in the chute right now. And so I'm happy, I think this is a win-win. So I'm happy to do with the Pioneer Project.
Vice Chair Mike.
Absolutely agree with Nathan. I think that getting rid of it's a win-win for us. I don't see, given today's market and the concessions we're already offering up, that we need to do any more. So, particularly if this is creating administrative problems here, I don't see the point to it anymore.
Commissioner Christiana.
I agree. I think that there are enough incentives in the pipeline that we don't really need this one either.
Okay, unless I hear something otherwise, sounds like, oh, Commissioner Mariel.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. I am fully in agreement of removing the Pioneer Project, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Lori or Debbie, if there is any reason why it should be kept.
I don't think so.
We can't think of what we couldn't think of one, which is why we were sort of recommending to not do it, because I think that we have, you know, there should be a good balance of incentives to do it without having a Pioneer Project.
Thank you. And that is, no, it is perfectly okay. I just feel like if I didn't ask that question, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Oh, I would be able to sleep. I would still have a question. Thank you.
It sounds like the Pioneer Project's it's on its last leg.
Right.
Is that all the head nods? Yes. Now, I have a question to move on from the Pioneer Project. I seem to remember a discussion about what the new requirements are for multifamily projects, and that's 0.7 per unit. Is that what that's what King County is looking at? Or I remember this discussion.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about parking along with affordable housing, because parking is an expense, and when you do reduce parking requirements, there are two reasons you reduce parking requirements. One, because you want to reduce cost, but two, because reducing impervious surface and encouraging other types of travel are good environmental benefits. So we're going to be talking about those two aspects of parking on the 16th. But just so you know, what the state law says is that within a quarter mile of transit, which is where this area is, the maximum parking you can require is 0.75 stall per unit, or and this is the way the city's been moving ahead with complying with the state laws at 0.75 per unit. But it also says or 1 stall up to 1 stall per bedroom, which
No.
I don't know why they put those two things together. It makes absolutely no sense. It makes no sense. That's what I can say, because for a 3-bedroom unit, you're going to require 3 stalls. It kind of goes in the opposite direction of what they wanted to do, which was to reduce parking. So still struggling with that, but more to come on the 16th when we talk about parking.
Thank you. So we're done with that tonight as far
With
as
parking.
pioneer projects and parking. So
Right.
now I believe you're going to talk about green building.
Correct. So this was something that the developer panel mentioned. They said, well, would you want to offer a density incentive, more than 150 dwelling units per acre, if an applicant committed to some kind of green building program? And there are 2 that I'm aware of. There may be multiple ones. One is a program done by the master builders of King Snohomish County, where they certify, they have a menu, and if you do certain things, you can get a green certification, which then you would hand to a jurisdiction and you would receive your bonus. The other one is the LEED program, which you probably have heard of, LEED, the different levels of gold and platinum and silver. And to achieve that, you have to do certain things related to green building and how your building is managed to achieve that certification. So that is the question. Is that an incentive, or is that an expectation? It would be phrased as an expectation that we probably would say, we encourage green building certification in this zone. I don't know that you would want to make it a mandate. I suppose you could, but that might be a cost issue in an area where you're trying to focus on density and affordable housing. So, any thoughts?
Okay, Christiana.
Is there a way to maybe make it be not, I guess, mandatory for a certain percentage to be green building?
Percentage of buildings in the area, do you mean? Or I don't know that you can segregate portions of a building.
Building of the development.
Yeah,
The
I'm not sure
materials
you can do that.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Mike.
I hate it when good priorities compete with each other, but when I think about the green versus affordable housing, if we're going to give up density concessions as an incentive to do something, I worry that doing it for green or doing it for, you end up competing between the affordable housing and the green development, which is a terrible place to be. When I think about the green, certainly something I approve of, I think we should be encouraging, but I think encouraging versus certainly mandating is probably the better way to go here. What we might consider is maybe doing some things that you see in some other cities now, particularly Seattle, where you're saying from now on, you can't build a building in the city after a certain point that uses gas. You've got to be all electric. So there may be some things that we could call out that we would favor having that have the impact, favorable impact on the environment that doesn't necessarily hurt our competitive position in attracting new development or degrading our ability to get additional affordable housing, which seems to be our primary goal right now.
Commissioner Leon?
Thank you so much. I mean, I think very much like Mike, in an ideal world for me, it's an expectation, but the competition between affordable housing and green building is, I mean, it's a reality. I think what I would appreciate, Lori and Debbie, is perhaps to see how maybe other jurisdictions surrounding us may have tackled this question. In my mind, an expectation, I mean, it's a step below a mandate, so it's almost more like a directive, but how can you enforce an expectation, right? So there's really no teeth to it. I still think an expectation doesn't mean that it's devoid of incentives that can go with it to encourage it. But I think, again, how can we encourage green building and not at the expense of affordable housing? That's really the crux of it. So I think if you could see what other areas have done, perhaps to encourage and what levels of success or not they may have had, I would be interested in learning more about that.
Okay.
Commissioner Derrick?
Yeah, I would like some clarification on my interpretation, I guess, or what I'm assuming is green building certification or LEED certification. Is this in the interest of building buildings that are more efficient for the inhabitants, or are these certifications more focused on building the buildings with items that did not cause deforestation or something of that nature?
I think there are different schedules of what the benefits are. So I think sometimes it's energy usage. I think sometimes it's building materials. I can try to track down the checklists for those certifications, if that would be helpful.
I'm just thinking along the lines of I would be for bonusing someone for adding more affordable housing or to make it more efficient for the people occupying the affordable housing in the long run, and not trying to, of course, tax the developers to prohibit them from doing so. So I guess I'm interested in finding that balance in there somewhere of making it a win-win, that for the occupants, it's more efficient in the long run, but at the same time for the developers, we're not tying their hands so that they can create more affordable housing, and obviously to hit their profit margin that they need to do so.
So just so you all know, I see 3 hands up, so I'm going to take them in the order that they were raised. Commissioner Mike? I see you, Christiana.
An additional thought on this. When I think of green today, the situation in terms of marketability has changed significantly over the last 3 to 5 years. It's become a good, positive marketing point for a developer to say that their property is compliant and is a green building. That's something they can use to sell and something that they can use to get a premium for their property. So I don't feel like we need to be obligated to feel like we need to incent it beyond what the market is already rewarding. And then, as I think as Derek was getting to, more and more the adopting green in the what it costs today for energy costs, it tends to be more efficient in the long run, more cost beneficial. So again, I don't know that we need to, just like the Pioneer project, I don't know that we need to offer any additional incentive here, particularly if it was going to take away from our ability to incentivize affordable housing.
Commissioner Tracy?
I think I would like to push back a little bit on the idea that affordable housing and sustainable, low impact green development are mutually exclusive or necessarily compete. I think in a lot of the most innovative thinking about housing, the thinking is also like, how can this be sustainable environmentally? Like, how can it be affordable and how can it be sustainable? And so I would love to have a conversation in our community that includes both of those things. I feel a little bit twitchy about the idea of incentivizing green development or low impact development. It feels like that is something that should be an expectation. I hear this commission being shy about, developing it into our code as a mandate, but I would like to kind of broaden the conversation, I guess, and not think about these things necessarily in opposition.
So Christian, I want you to know I see you, but Debbie wants to respond to that.
I think the other thing we can take a look at is the council just adopted the climate action plan with a whole list of implementation measures. So that's probably something we can bring back to the commission as well, to look at some of the recommended measures in the climate action plan that speak to particularly green building.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much. Okay, Commissioner Christiana.
I just had a quick answer for Derek. The LEED certification really looks for people to decrease the carbon, the builders per se, to decrease carbon emissions. They want to decrease energy usage in the construction, decrease water usage, decrease the amount of waste, using green materials. They want to increase the health and indoor environmental quality, and decrease the contribution to global climate change. So that's basically what a LEED certification is looking for in a builder.
Thank you. So does someone want to, are you still have your hand up, Tracy? No.
Yeah, that was a new raise, not a legacy hand.
Oh, not a legacy raise.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I love that.
I picked that up from somebody else. Like, I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't.
Oh, okay. Well, legacy, Tracy, go ahead.
So I just wanted to tack on to the comment that I just made with, and Christiana's comment was a wonderful actually lead into this. I feel like we are at the point with our climate and environment that we can't not have this conversation about how our buildings can be more climate friendly and not continue to contribute to warming, because we're just in a really bad place. So I feel like this is a really necessary conversation to have. And I do feel also it intersects with there are some, environmental justice issues here too, like often the communities who are most susceptible to the negative impacts of warming are lower income communities and those who are most in need of affordable housing. So there are a lot of intersections here, and I would just love to acknowledge that and continue to have the conversation in a very nuanced way.
So since you jumped into having a conversation, would you feel like jumping in and proposing what direction to staff? I'm going to put it back to you, and then we can all talk about it.
And Lori's waving her hand, and she has a smile on her face. So I think she has something happy to say.
I'm sorry, Lori.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So I want to follow on Debbie's comment, and that is this. I can tell from this conversation that this is a huge issue with many facets, and that thinking about a small incentive in our TOD is not the place to have this conversation. I think Debbie's point about the climate action plan, which the city council has adopted and is going to be talking about staffing and implementation, that's the place. This is not an issue for the TOD. This is an issue for the city as a whole. So I would recommend, even though I said, should we talk about this? I would recommend that we not talk about this and that we let when your recommendation goes forward, we let the city council know that this came up and we know it's important. And I'm sure it's an implementation measure in the cap, but we'll verify that. that we do think this is an important topic of community conversation. So that would be my recommendation.
Well, my view personally is that I would agree with you, Lori, but I also want to see what what Debbie's going to bring to us, because I don't think the council wants us just to say, okay, we're going to punt this to you. I don't want to do that, but I think we should at least revisit this with some time commitment at a future meeting, that you could find some time for us to, with all of the data, so that we all feel comfortable with what we're doing. Not to say that we won't do what you suggest or what anyone else suggests, but I think that we do need more information and direction based upon what the council has adopted already.
Right.
Boy, I see Debbie shaking her head yes, so that's a good sign.
But I think it's information that the commission will find useful to look at the implementation measures. And I agree with Laurie that this is a bigger conversation for all buildings, whether it's TOD or not. And I think for the commission to try and get in front of this and come up with a recommendation might be a little premature. But I like Laurie's suggestion that to acknowledge that this needs to be tackled for all buildings or development in Kenmore, not just the TOD, and to maybe move that up as an implementation measure. That might be a way of acknowledging it and putting forward a recommendation at the same time.
Well, we look forward to the information, and I'm sure there will be comments from the commissioners on that. And if you can put some time on our agenda, squeeze just a little more time, we'd appreciate that, because I think that, well, I see Commissioner Tracy's got her hand back up, unless it's a legacy hand.
That was a new hand. Brand new shiny hand. There's a question of clarification from Debbie. I want to make sure I understood what you just said. Were you suggesting that, so you're suggesting it's a larger issue that has to do with all construction in Kenmore, not just construction in the TOD. But did you say that we could recommend a faster rollout of some of these things in the climate action plan in the TOD? Is that what you said, or did you not say that? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah.
Well, first of all, let's get the facts in front of us in terms of what the implementation measures are. And what I was suggesting is that this, you could sort of say, this came up as an important topic in the discussion, and the commission are very interested in this green building approach, not just for TOD, but for citywide. And then to sort of say that when the council is evaluating the implementation measures and which one should go first, the commission suggests that maybe this should have a higher priority. And that's what I was trying to say.
So just generally, but not specifically related to the TOD.
I think it's a bigger topic, because I think if you're going to look at green building standards, how those are applied and to what kind of development, I think it's going to be beyond the TOD. I don't think it's going to be just TOD kind of development. It may be, I don't know where you start. I don't know if it's a broad recommendation for all buildings, or you do it by commercial or residential. I'm not sure, but I would think you would want to tell the council that for all the reasons that everybody has stated about why green building is important, you would present this and say it came up during TOD, and for these reasons we feel that this is a citywide measure that should be a priority when the council is assessing the implementation measures in the climate action plan. Because obviously, and I don't know, this will probably help, because I think in the climate action plan they are listed by I I can't even remember. And
I
Sammy,
think
if
it's
you're-
like they're given numbers or something.
they're given numbers, sort of
Yeah,
a
like-
way to implement them.
Priorities.
Right.
3-2-1 or something.
So we can take a look at that, see where green building lands, and see if that kind of lines up with green building being a, top of the list thing that is recommended or further down. And the commission could certainly make its own recommendation about where they feel it should be.
Okay, yeah, I largely agree with you. And also, I think my question, I'm trying to figure out, I know that we as a commission have we have the privilege of and the honor of making recommendations on a very specific docket of work. And I'm trying to figure out how our mandate and our work intersects with this very important issue. That's what I'm trying to figure out, like where we have the ability and power to make a meaningful recommendation is what I'm trying to figure out here.
Okay.
May I suggest so that we,
So maybe
I
a
think
topic
that's a
for
good
the
point.
next that maybe it's a topic, I think, that once we have the facts in front of us, there might be a way to kind of craft that response. I think we're missing
Yes.
some information right now. So I would suggest that we find a time on a future meeting to have this conversation.
Is that okay with everybody? Okay, so that's what we'll show in the minutes or in Lori's memo. But I see Commissioner Christiana is dying to, that is not a legacy hand, that's a new hand.
I just was gonna, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but there are two really good websites, especially for the heron rookery. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has an actual management plan that is accessible. So I'm just, is it okay if I just email everybody the link to that? It's already all set up. And then
If I suggest is from the standpoint of communications and open meeting, which I've been finger whipped about, is you should send it to Lori and then Lori
Okay.
will send us out to it all.
Okay.
Did I do good that time, Lori?
Very good. Thank you.
I learned.
And then the other one is the US Green Building Council also has their lead rating. That's super easy to read and understand. So it's just two websites you can go to if you have any questions. And I'll send that to you, Lori. It's just
Perfect.
you can click on the link.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, is there, let me look at my agenda here just to make sure. Are we finished, Lori and Debbie, with your part of the agenda? That is a head nod, yes. Is there anything for I show upcoming meetings August 2nd and August 16th. That is correct, we're good. And maybe more people will join the three of us here. I mean, that's up to you, certainly. So is there anything for the good of the order or any further comments from the commission? Well, hearing none, I show 10 minutes after 9 and I adjourn the meeting.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Night all.